So for those of you that are new to us, what we like to start with is a recap of the episode, help people keep all the information fresh and such long form content. Sometimes you just need a recap. So anyway, we do cut this out and put the recap by itself on YouTube as well, just to, have that content there for those of you that need it. So if you happen to be at on that recap video right now, hello from the past. But also, if you're interested in hearing Blake and I's actual discussion, theory crafting, and everything, we will link to the full video down below. So feel free to check that out. But yeah, without further ado, I guess let's jump right into this. Okay, so the episode picks up right where we left off last time with the party heading to the Spire by Fire to kind of rest and lick their wounds after this, big battle with Duggar and their, conversation with Esterosh last week, or, a couple weeks ago at this point. Anyway, so they arrive at the Spire by Fire, and Ashton basically has this great idea to play a game and kind of learn more about each other. And the game is called What the Fuck's Up with That? And it's very simple. How it works is well, he buys some liquor, so it's just like a drinking game. But the rules are simple. They basically roll a dice, and whoever rolls the highest gets to ask a question of whoever rolled the lowest. And Ashton says that you're allowed to be vague, you don't have to incriminate anyone, but you have to be honest. And so the party's like, yeah, let's do this. But FCG's like, well, what do I do if I don't drink? And everyone's like, oh yeah, you don't drink. They're like, what happens if you do drink? So he does like take a shot really quick, and the liquid just disappears inside of him and doesn't seem to have any effect. So they're like, here, FCG, you just eat these pieces of copper. That's what you'll do instead of drinking. Anyway, so the game begins, and in the first round, we have Laudna asking Dorian a question. So Dorian rolled the lowest, Laudna the highest, and she wants to know about his fancy clothes, his like upkept demeanor. He always looks so clean, and like he comes from wealth. So she's like, what's up with that? And he says, it is wealth, but it's inherited wealth. And they're like, oh my gosh, are you a lord or are you a prince? And he's like, no, it's not like that. Well, not really. And he says he is second in line to a prominent family that has a lot of money, but it's a family, probably no one's ever heard of. Um, and it's clear that he's not really comfortable talking about this. And FCG asks why he's embarrassed of his family. And he's like, I'm not really embarrassed. Like, my family, they're good people. But sometimes, just being a good person is not enough. And he claims that he had these expectations for himself that he like wanted to fulfill for his family, but he wasn't able to. And so he decided to kind of strike on his own and, carve out his own destiny at that point. Um, and that's essentially the end of his round. Round two, we have Fern asking Ashton if they've ever been in love before. And Ashton says they don't know. And the party kind of talks about like the different kinds of love, like romantic love, like friendship love. And Ashton says they think they have loved someone before, and it was about 10 years ago. Um, and he doesn't really reveal much more about that, but he does say, I did have love for my old crew, in the way like a friendship type of love. And he reveals that his old crew was called the Nobodies, and it was basically this group of people the kids that had all like they'd all grown up together. Um, but he reveals that they have all left town except for him. Uh, and the party asks like, well, what happened? And he says, that's another question. So he doesn't reveal anything more than that. In round three, we have Fresh Cut Grass asking Fern what her greatest regret is. And she thinks about this for a while and then isn't quite ready to talk about it. So she, takes a shot and asks if there's another question that FCG has. So FCG asks, okay, what are you, Orem, and Dorian in Drusar for? Like, why are y'all here? And she says that they came to this place to meet up with some friends of Orem, but really that was, more of Orem's thing, and that would really be a question for him. And so FCG asks yet a third question and just asks about her thievery, how like why she steals so much.
Sticky
And
fingers.
yeah, exactly. And she reveals that it's not really about the thrill of like actually taking something. it's more that she just loves to collect things and have things. And she talks about back home in her bedroom how she just has like this huge collection of trinkets from, that she's collected from her different travels. And just in that conversation, she also reveals that, she lived with her grandmother Maury, and, this was in the Feywild. And that basically concludes that round. In round four, Laudna asks Imogen how she's feeling about her father and the fact that, she had to kind of reveal him as collateral to the Hubak corsairs. And Imogen reveals that, she's nervous, but she had a really good feeling about the corsairs, and so she doesn't think they're gonna just, like do anything to her dad for no reason. Plus, he's pretty far away in their town, which is in the Talland Highlands. But then she does reveal a bit about her life growing up. We find out that she hasn't always had these, telepathic abilities. They are rather new to her. New meaning like the last few years, but hasn't always had them. And she reveals that, it's probably better for her dad that she has left. She thinks he's probably happier and living a better life because once she had these abilities on set, um, it became hard for her to be around people. So she kind of had to be reclusive, which meant her father kind of had to be reclusive. Plus, they were getting, like weird looks, and it was like the rumors around the town, like, what's up with Imogen. And so it was very kind of
Mm.
socially awkward and lonely. So she thinks her dad's probably doing better that she's gone. And she does reveal that she was pretty miserable up until Laudna came to town. And she said that was the first time she felt any peace. And we find out that they have been traveling together for about 2 years now. Um, then in round five, we have Fern asking a question of Orem. But she says, I know Orem pretty well. So instead, she takes a question from Ashton to ask Orem. And he just asks, okay, what are you guys doing here? Like, why are you here? What's going on? And Orem says that he is here on a mission for his hometown, Zephyra, that someone attacked his home and he is here to learn more. And that certain breadcrumbs had kind of pointed them to Drusar, and that's why they're here, to find out more. And we find out more about this later, but that's all he reveals in this moment. So then in round six, we have Orem asking FCG, and Orem asks, he wants to know more about FCG's origin. And Orem says that, like, I've only seen one thing kind of like you in my days, and it wasn't even that much like you. So he's like, are your brothers and sisters like the only ones like you that you've met? Like, he's basically just asking more about FCG's origin and, like, kind of just wants to shed some light on that. Um, but FCG starts to answer, but he gets like stuck, and he just starts repeating the same word over and over. He's like, I am, and he does that a
Right.
couple times, and the party's like, whoa, like what's going on? Can he not like access these memories, or is there like certain information he's not allowed to like, access? And Orem's like, hey, I'm so sorry. Like he realizes he's asking too much, and so he instead changes the question to how old are you? And FCG says that they were with Dancer for 2 years, so I guess I'm 2 years old. And Fern loves that because she loves babies. And basically, oh yeah, Dorian asks also, he didn't really have a question, but I guess he just asked this anyway. He asks if FCG can dream. And FCG says he doesn't think he can, but he's going to start trying to tonight. And then finally, we have round seven, which is kind of the biggest one. Save the best for last, where we have FCG asking Laudna a question, and he asks, "Are you dead? Like, what the fuck's up with that?"
Yeah.
And Laudna says she's not entirely sure. She thinks she probably is, but she thinks maybe she's like at some sort of cross between life and death. She says she definitely did die, and then just woke up one day surrounded by other corpses. She said all of Whitestone was in a panic of a death and a nightmarish, and so she just ran away. And that was 30 years ago. Whatever happened, she was like hit with like a necromantic blast, she says, and boom, she woke up and she was alive. Um, she reveals that she was 20 years old when this happened. And since that was 30 years ago, in a way, she's like 50, but
Right.
she still looks 20. And she also says that she thinks she was only dead for about 48 hours. She remembers all of her previous life, and we do have confirmation that she is human. Like that's her race, or at least it was her race. Um, and so we just get a bunch about her backstory here, and she reveals that she had magical abilities even as a young girl. So like her magic isn't new from like being undead or whatever. And she says that her parents were just like these simple, humble farmers on the outskirts of Whitestone. They were pretty naive, not really keen to the political goings on of Whitestone, and they basically just wanted a better life for their daughter. So the fact that she had these magical abilities, they were like, here, like you can make something of yourself. And the implication is that like they kind of give her over to the Briarwoods, who are the custodians of Whitestone during this time, like the leaders. And you know, since her parents were naive, they didn't really understand what was happening. And one thing led to another, I guess, but all we know is that Laudna was killed, presumably by the Briarwoods. Um, and the rest is this kind of history. We don't know why, but
Mm-hmm.
she died and now has been brought back. She
Mm-hmm.
also reveals that her parents are dead, and that basically for the last 30 years she has just been traveling from town to town, kind of setting up in the woods and being the spooky undead witch until
Yeah.
like the townspeople find out and run her out of town. And so that's just been what she's doing up until she met
Mm-hmm.
Imogen, and they've been traveling together for the
And there's the detail too that she hears.
yes.
Uh, yeah. Sorry.
No, you're good. And yeah, we do find out that she she hears a voice in her head that is presumably we don't have confirmation of that in this moment, but it's Delilah Briarwood. Um,
Okay. Because they said D Briarwood. Yeah, and I
mhm,
didn't know who D was. So
yeah,
okay.
and
Interesting. I never
yeah,
saw campaign one, so I
yeah,
don't know what this means,
we'll
but
talk about it. We'll talk about
okay.
it. Um, so yeah, and that basically wraps up her, and that basically wraps up the entire game. There's a little moment where Dorian plays a song for everyone, and Imogen actually reads his mind because being so like she's a little intoxicated and she kind of doesn't have her walls up, so she's kind of just like an unfiltered telepath. Um, and Dorian actually, or Robbie actually goes and whispers to Laura what she finds out, which we don't find out in this moment, but we do find out later, a little bit later, that he was just thinking of his mother while he was playing that song. And Laudna also in this moment gives Dorian a Bertrand doll that she made out of chicken
Yeah.
bones and a Bertrand's hair, and he's like, "Oh, thanks."
Yeah, I forgot
uh,
about that.
and then oh, one other cute, quick little moment was Fern takes FCG and turns him upside down to see if like that lick where the liquid went, and it does come back out of his mouth, and she just drinks it. Um,
Yeah.
but anyway, so everyone goes to bed, and we do have a little moment of right before Laudna goes to sleep that she hears that voice in her head, and she says, "Careful, dear. Some things are meant to be kept secret." Um, Ooh. Anyway, so they all go to sleep, and the next morning they wake up. They're kind of deciding, what should we do, but ultimately land on going to meet with the Hubot corsairs again and fill them in on, everything that's happened, that they found and defeated Duggar, and just kind of get caught up. So they make their way there, use the phrase, "We've come to loosen the snare," which is the good phrase. And they're taken back to the same area, and they end up talking to Yash once again, who they talked to last time, and they basically just fill him in, tell him about Duggar, and the main thing they talk about is making that connection with Esteros to see if they could make that relationship. So they present that to Yash, and he tells them, "Oh yeah, I'm familiar with Esteros. The inheritor of Mistress Prudage," and he's like, "There's a lot of rumors about that guy, that maybe he killed Mistress Prudage, or maybe he's a vampire," which we'll talk about that. And he's like, "Yeah, I don't really trust people who've inherited money. Like they're usually not aligned with the same things that we're trying to do." And the party's like, "Yeah, we think you guys might have some things in common." And so Yash says, "I'll think about it, and if we do meet, it'll have to be on our terms, and we'll come and find you and let you know if we want that connection to be made." Um, And so the party's like, okay, cool. And they basically decide to leave on that. And uh, yeah, do you want to take it from there?
Yeah, totally. Great job, by the way. Yeah, so the party they decide, okay, maybe our next line of direction would be going back to Lord Esteros and talking to him. But they also decide, you know what, maybe we should dip into the Crook House and see if anyone knows anything else about maybe the anger or Rashad Breggio, same person, obviously. And so they make their way to the Crook House, and Milo's missing, but inside is Annie Otta, who's reading a book. And Ashton makes this joke of like, I didn't know you could read. And they kind of talk back and forth. They ask him questions, ask about Broomstone, and he's like, I've never even heard of that. I don't know what that is. And really asks about the anger, like, hey, what do you know about the anger? And he's like, oh yeah, I mean the Loomis twins, which we had known. I think we had known that name before, and we had known that like these were one of like the noble houses, one of the Mahan houses.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, Annie says, yeah, the Loomis twins hired the anger, and they're kind of like, yeah, maybe we should go talk to them. And he's like, yeah, okay, yeah, good luck with that. Pretty much just pointing out that like the noble families are extremely exclusive and isolated, and they, would not allow. They actually maybe even fear poor people more, people like them, than they would, the politics of other rich people.
Yeah.
So they're talking more about it, and FCG is mentioning, hey, how's your practicing going for this performance that Annie's been preparing for in the previous scenes we've seen with them. And FCG is like, yeah, if you want, you could practice, or you could play in front of Dorian. Dorian's is a musician, and Annie's a bit ego's a little threatened by this, and is like, oh yeah, okay, you're a musician, sure. And they have like sort of like this Devil Went Down to Georgia-esque playoff jam session against one another. And naturally, the party, this was very much reminded me of EXU episode 4 or 5 with the talent show, but everyone really throws in their own like pizzazz onto Dorian. Like Orium does druidcraft to get this flower to appear over his ear. And Imogen does like, I think it was like dancing lights or something that spell out Dorian Storm above his heads. But the really awesome thing about this was they're doing a roll off basically. And Dorian's like, okay, yeah, I wonder what I'll roll. And he has to roll with advantage because of all this awesome stuff. And he rolls a natural 20. And it's just such a cool moment. And they're like, oh, but you have advantage. And he's like, well, I mean, it's not going to roll another natural 20. And he rolls it. And it's a second natural 20 in a row. And like everyone loses their mind.
That's crazy.
It's so cool. So fun. Long story short, he beats Annie in this jam session. And Annie, frustrated, sort of storms out of the room, and Imogen's like, Annie, are you okay? And anyway, Storm slams the door and then opens it and says, Ashton, by the way, you have a letter in your room. Ashton goes, looks at the letter. We don't know what it says. In fact, later on, Imogen convinces him to let her see the letter, but he redacts most of it.
Yeah.
And so there was some like small detail that was on there. I can't remember what it was, but very vague. And again, the majority of it is redacted.
Right.
And Ashton basically says like, he's pretty frustrated with this letter. He's shook by it. And is basically like, I don't want to get you guys involved in this yet. Like, we kind of need to let this, whatever's in this letter, sort of play out before we address it. But since he's so upset by it, he does say basically, I need to go speak to Ephid. And starts calling for Ephid, goes over to Ephid's house. And it's like this ramshacked fishing cottage is kind of what I envision, like little fishing net all over the place. And this Asfari? I don't know how to pronounce it.
I don't know how to use furry or something. We need to.
It's like a bird, basically. Old bird dude. Very creepy character, by the way. Yes. So cool. Sort of slinks his, very much like old Greg, by the way, if you know that video, very old Greg-ish, sort of slinks in and, hello. And they have like this conversation, and they do similar to what they've done in previous scenes. They basically ask like, hey, what do you know about Brimstone? What do you know about the anger? What do you know about, and they just sort of ask these random questions.
Yeah.
Effie basically says like, well, yes, of course, Brimstone's coming in here constantly, but doesn't know any more details other than obviously it must be something incredibly dangerous, and it likely isn't related to using it for flying ships either. Also asks about the person who dropped off the letter that Ashton received, and Effie says it was a nicer person, dressed quite nice. And then also asks about the anger and the Loomis twins, and just basically tries to get more information there as well, and doesn't really get any new insights. But there is one last detail. Fern asks Effie not to leave and says, "You remind me of a friend of mine, Dr. Nesbit." And it was a bird that she had that she named that. So Ashton, interestingly enough, gives Effie 50 gold to stay on his good side. And other than that, the only added detail about the anger was that he was a bodyguard for the Loomis twins, which we already knew, but that everything basically fell apart. I mean, everything like went to crap pretty much. So after this detail, they decide to go see Lord Esteros, and he's having his breakfast. And by the way, I forgot Yash had given everyone coffee, and FCG had dumped the coffee inside of him to like store it like an incubator. And there's this great scene where he offers Lord Esteros the coffee, and he's like, "Why is it so warm?" It just was a really funny scene. They do talk more about having seen the Who Bought Corsairs and being willing to organize that meetup still. But Laudna actually points out that there's this rumor that Esteros has actually killed Madame Prudage, the former owner of the home that he was the bodyguard of. And very deliberately, he points out, I served her for the better half of my life. Absolutely would never do such a thing. Ashton does an insight check after he's like, is no one going to challenge this? And gets a whisper similar to Laudna getting a whisper. Or no, Orem getting a whisper. Or wait, no, it was Laudna who got a whisper earlier on. A lot of whispering going around, by the way.
Yeah, there was.
They ask again about the Loomis twins and just trying to follow that trail. And Esteros points out that the Loomis twins are actually dead, that they were killed in this attack. And Ashad, even though he had agreed to organize a meetup, Ashad is still recovering and seems to be asleep. Seems to be in some kind of like induced coma while he's recovering.
Yeah, like got messed up pretty bad, I guess.
Yeah, and there's like whoever his keeper is or steward is, that person is just like, it's not time yet. Other than that, they're kind of like, what do we do now? And Esteros is like, hey, at the Dreamscape Theater, there's been missing patrons. People have been disappearing up to groups of 4. Maybe you can go check that out. And so they're like, okay, yeah, let's do it. Also, I should mention, by the way, through all this stuff happening, they're also like workshopping group names.
Oh yeah.
And so they had asked a couple of different names. They had come up with like, okay, Bertrand Bell. So maybe like we're the Trouble Bells or something. And Yash had been like, please don't use that name. And if you do, don't associate me with you guys. Esteros also is like, yeah, you guys are kind of eclectic. So they're like, are we like the eclectic company? And they're like, no, that's terrible. So they're working out the whole time. Just moving along, they do make their way over to Zidana's home, who is the old woman that Laudna and Imogen have been staying with, and mentions that Zidana mentions that she had been a crafter of pottery for the Mahan houses, and even tells them how they can find some of her work. And separately, they all kind of get into Imogen's room in this very tight space where Orem feels comfortable sharing more about what happened that led him on his mission. And apparently, several years ago, an attack was made on the Voice of the Tempest, where the people who attacked, the attack was very quick, and then they melted away into nothing. Very vague and ambiguous. Supposedly, the attack in Drusar was very similar. But Esteros also mentioned earlier that there's really no other details because this attack apparently came from within the house. And the party actually supposes that maybe it's one of those holes that Duggar snotted out of. So Orem does mention, Laudna asks, did you know anyone who was killed? And Orem says, yes, I did. And which is an interesting detail we might talk about later. But ultimately, that's why they're here, is to figure out if there's any sort of connection and what's really going on with that. The party makes their way over to the Dreamscape Theater. It is very bougie, very gaudy, really sticks out like a sore thumb. And they're trying to find a seat, but the tickets are pretty much sold out. And then Dorian pays 10 platinum, which is like 100 gold,
Ooh.
to the host person, who's like, oh yes, right this way, sir, to your box seat. And Fern actually does manage to steal back 6 of those platinum out of the person's coat. Once they've sort of seated and they're sort of waiting for the show to begin, the host mentions to Dorian, hey, there's a patron who wants to see you. And everyone's kind of like, well, who wants to see you? And he's like, yeah, to bring him up here. And they're like, oh, they want to see you privately. So he's like, okay, guys, I'll be right back. Goes down. It's this hooded figure who's like, what are you doing here? And Dorian's like, who are you? What's going on? Reveals himself to be Dorian's older brother, Cyrus Wyvernwind, I think.
Yeah, Wyvern.
Yeah, Cyrus, though, his older brother, and Dorian is astounded. He's like, how did you get here? Like, how did you get away? And he's like, I followed your lead. I did what you did. And so his older brother seems to be taking the same path that he did as well. They agree to meet and talk later. And then Dorian makes his way back upstairs, where people are like, what was going on? And he says, oh, it was just, a fan who had seen me perform somewhere else, because I'm from here. And they just wanted, to say hi. So, and then that is essentially the episode. That's what happened on episode 6 of Critical Role Campaign 3.
Yes, sir.